Good evening. I'm glad you're joining me again tonight for another reading from John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress. And in our reading last Sunday night, Christian was joined by his companion Faithful along the way to the celestial city, and they encountered trials and of various types and all sorts of different things, and again were an encouragement to one another along the way. And they're still together where we pick up again in our reading for tonight. It says, "Now when they were almost quite out of this wilderness, Faithful chanced to cast his eye back and espied one coming after them, and he knew him. 'Oh,' said Faithful to his brother, 'who comes yonder?' Then Christian looked and said, 'It is my good friend Evangelist.' 'Aye, and my good friend too,' said Faithful, 'for it was he that set me in the way to the gate.' Now was Evangelist come up to them, and thus saluted them. Evangelist said, 'Peace be with you, dearly beloved, and peace be to your helpers.' Christian said, 'Welcome, welcome, my good Evangelist. The sight of thy countenance brings to remembrance thy ancient kindness and unwearied laboring for my eternal good.' Faithful said, 1,000 times welcome. Thy company, O sweet Evangelist, how desirable it is to us poor pilgrims.' Then said Evangelist, 'How hath it fared with you, my friend, since the time of our last parting? What have you met with? And how have you behaved yourselves?' Then Christian and Faithful told him of all the things that had happened to them in the way, and how and with what difficulty they had arrived at that place. 'Right glad I ain't 'em,' said Evangelist, 'not that you have met with trials, but that you have been victors. And for that you have, notwithstanding many weaknesses, continued in the way to this very day. I say, right glad am I of this thing, and that for mine own sake and yours. I have sowed, and you have reaped, and the day is coming when both he that sowed and they that reap shall rejoice together. That is, if you hold out. For in due season you shall reap, if you faint not. The crown is before you, and it is an incorruptible one. So run, that you may obtain it. Some there be that set out for this crown, and after they have gone far for it, another comes in and takes it from them. Hold fast, therefore, that you have. Let no man take your crown. You are not yet out of the gunshot of the devil. You have not resisted unto blood, striving against sin. Let the kingdom be always before you, and believe steadfastly concerning things that are invisible. Let nothing that is on this side of the other world get within you, and above all look very well to your own hearts and to the lust thereof, for they are deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Set your faces like a flint. You have all power in heaven and earth on your side.' Then Christian thanked him for his exhortation, but told him withal that they would have him speak further to them for their help the rest of the way, and the rather for that they well knew that he was a prophet, and could tell them of things that might happen unto them, and also how they might resist and overcome them. To which request Faithful also consented. So Evangelist began as followeth. 'My sons, you have heard, in the words of the truth of the gospel, that you must, through many tribulations, enter into the kingdom of heaven. And again, that in every city bonds and afflictions abide in you. And therefore you cannot expect that you should go long on your pilgrimage without them, in some sort or other. You have found something of the truth of these testimonies upon you already, and more will immediately follow. For now, as you see, you are almost out of this wilderness, and therefore you will soon come into a town that you will by and by see before you. And in that town you will be hardly beset with enemies, who will strain hard, but they will kill you. And be sure that one or both of you must seal the testimony which you hold with blood. But be you faithful unto death, and the king will give you a crown of life. He that shall die there, although his death will be unnatural, and his pain perhaps great, he will yet have the better of his fellow, not only because he will be arrived at the celestial city soonest, but because he will escape many miseries that the other will meet with in the rest of his journey. But when you are come to the town, and shall find fulfilled what I have here related, then remember your friend, and quit yourselves like men, and commit the keeping of your souls to your God in well-doing, as unto a faithful Creator. Then I saw in my dream that when they were got out of the wilderness, they presently saw a town before them, and the name of that town is Vanity. And at the town there is a fair kept, called Vanity Fair. It is kept all the year long. It beareth the name of Vanity Fair, because the town where it is kept is lighter than vanity, and also because all that is there sold, or that cometh thither, is vanity. As is the saying of the wise, all that cometh is vanity. This fair is no new erected business, but a thing of ancient standing. I will show you the original of it. Almost 5,000 years agone, there were pilgrims walking to the celestial city, as these two honest persons are. And Beelzebub, Apollyon, and Legion, with their companions, perceiving by the path that the pilgrims made, that their way to the city lay through this town of Vanity, they contrived here to set up a fair wherein should be sold all sorts of vanity, and that it should last all the year long. Therefore at this fair are all such merchandise sold as houses, lands, trades, places, honors, preferments, titles, countries, kingdoms, lust, pleasures, and delights of all sorts, as whores, bawds, wives, husbands, children, masters, servants, lives, blood, bodies, souls, silver, gold, pearls, precious stones, and what not. And moreover, at this fair there is at all times to be seen juggling cheats, games, plays, fools, apes, knaves, and rogues, and that of every kind. Here are to be seen too, and that for nothing, thefts, murders, adulteries, false swears, and that of a blood-red color. And as in other fairs of less moment, there are the several rows and streets under their proper names, where such and such wares are vended. So here likewise you have the proper places, rows, streets, viz. Countries and kingdoms, where the wares of this fair are soonest to be found. Here is the Britain row, the French row, the Italian row, the Spanish row, the German row, where several sorts of vanities are to be sold. But as in other fairs, some one commodity is as the chief of all the fair, so the ware of Rome and her merchandise is greatly promoted in this fair. Only our English nation, with some others, have taken a dislike thereat. Now, as I said, the way to the celestial city lies just through this town where this lusty fair is kept. And he that will go to the city, and yet not go through this town, must needs go out of the world. The Prince of Princes himself, when here, went through this town to his own country, and that upon a fair day too. Yea, and as I think, it was Beelzebub, the chief lord of this fair, that invited him to buy of his vanities. Yea, would have made him lord of the fair, but he might have done him reverence as he went through the town. Yea, because he was such a person of honor, Beelzebub had him from street to street, and showed him all the kingdoms of the world in a little time, that he might, if possible, allure the Blessed One to cheapen and buy some of his vanities. But he had no mind to the merchandise, and therefore left the town without laying out so much as 1 farthing upon these vanities. This fair, therefore, is an ancient thing of long standing and a very great fair. Now these pilgrims, as I said, must needs go through this fair. Well, so they did. But behold, even as they entered into the fair, all the people in the fair were moved, and the town itself, as it were, in a hubbub about them. and that for several reasons. For, first, the pilgrims were clothed with such kind of raiment as was diverse from the raiment of any that traded in that fair. The people therefore of the fair made a great gazing upon them. Some said they were fools, some said they were bedlams, and some they are outlandish men. Secondly, and as they wondered at their apparel, so they did likewise at their speech. For few could understand what they said. They naturally spoke the language of Canaan, but they that kept the fair were the men of this world, so that from one end of the fair to the other, they seemed barbarians each to the other. Thirdly, but that which did not a little amuse the merchandisers was that these pilgrims set very light by all their wares. They cared not so much as to look upon them, and if they called upon them to buy, they would put their fingers in their ears and cry, "Turn away mine eyes from beholding vanity," and look upwards, signifying that their trade and traffic was in heaven. One chanced mockingly, beholding the carriage of the men, to say unto them, "What will ye buy?" But they, looking gravely upon him, answered, "We buy the truth." At that there was an occasion taken to despise the men the more, some mocking, some taunting, some speaking reproachfully, and some calling upon others to smite them. At last things came to a hubbub and great stir in the fair, insomuch that all order was confounded. Now was word presently brought to the great one of the fair, who quickly came down and deputed some of his most trusty friends to take these men into examination, about whom the fair was almost overturned. So the men were brought to examination. And they that sat upon them asked them whence they came, whither they went, and what they did there in such unusual garb. The men told them that they were pilgrims and strangers in the world, and that they were going to their own country, which was the heavenly Jerusalem, and that they had given no occasion to the men of the town, nor yet to the merchandisers, thus to abuse them, and to let them in their journey, except it was for that, when one asked them what they would buy, they said they would buy the truth. But they that were appointed to examine them did not believe them to be any other than bedlams and mad, or else such as came to put all things into a confusion in the fair. Therefore they took them and beat them, and besmeared them with dirt, and then put them into the cage, that they might be made a spectacle to all the men of the fair. Behold, Vanity Fair, the pilgrims there, are chained and stand beside. Even so it was our Lord passed here, and on Mount Calvary died. There, therefore, they lay for some time, and were made the objects of any man's sport, or malice, or revenge, the great one of the fair laughing still at all that befell them. But the men, being patient, and not rendering railing for railing, but contrariwise blessing, and giving good words for bad, and kindness for injuries done, some men in the fair that were more observing and less prejudiced than the rest began to check and blame the baser sort for their continual abuses done by them to the men. They, therefore, in angry manner, let fly at them again, counting them as bad as the men in the cage, and telling them that they seemed confederates, and should be made partakers of their misfortunes. The other replied that for aught they could see, the men were quiet and sober, and intended nobody any harm, and that there were many that traded in their fair that were more worthy to be put into the cage, yea, and pillory too, than were the men they had abused. Thus, after divers words had passed on both sides, the men behaving themselves all the while very wisely and soberly before them, they fell to some blows among themselves, and did harm one to another. Then were these two poor men brought before their examiners again, and there charged as being guilty of the late hubbub that had been in the fair. So they beat them pitifully, and hanged irons upon them, and led them in chains up and down the fair, for an example and a terror to others, lest any should speak in their behalf, or join themselves unto them. But Christian and Faithful behaved themselves yet more wisely, and received the ignominy and the shame that was cast upon them, with so much meekness and patience that it won to their side, though but few in comparison of the rest, several of the men in the fair. This put the other party yet into greater rage, insomuch that they concluded the death of these 2 men. Wherefore they threatened that the cage nor iron should serve their turn, but that they should die for the abuse they had done and for deluding the men of the fair. Then were they remanded to the cage again, until further order should be taken with them. So they put them in, and made their feet fast in the stocks. Here, therefore, they called again to mind what they had heard from their faithful friend Evangelist, and were the more confirmed in their way and sufferings by what he told them would happen to them. They also now comforted each other, that whose lot it was to suffer, even he should have the best of it. Therefore each man secretly wished that he might have that preferment, but committing themselves to the all-wise disposal of him that ruleth all things, with much content, they abode in the condition in which they were, until they should be otherwise disposed of. Then a convenient time being appointed, they brought them forth to their trial in order to their condemnation. When the time was come, they were brought before their enemies and arraigned. The judge's name was Lord Hategood. Their indictment was one and the same in substance, though somewhat varying in form, the contents whereof were this: that they were enemies to and disturbers of their trade, that they had made commotions and divisions in the town, and had won a party to their own most dangerous opinions, in contempt of the law of their prince. Now, faithful, play the man, speak for thy God. Fear not the wicked's malice, nor their rod. Speak boldly, man, the truth is on thy side. Die for it, and to life in triumph ride. Then Faithful began to answer, that he had only set himself against that which hath set itself against him that is higher than the highest. And, said he, as for disturbance, I make none, being myself a man of peace. The parties that were won to us were won by beholding our truth and innocence, and they only turned from the worse to the better. And as to the king you talk of, since he is Beelzebub, the enemy of our Lord, I defy him and all his angels. Then proclamation was made that they had aught to say for their lord the king against the prisoner at the bar, should forthwith appear and give in their evidence. So there came in 3 witnesses, to wit, envy, superstition, and pickthank. They were then asked if they knew the prisoner at the bar, and what they had to say for their lord the king against him. Then stood forth envy, and said to this effect, My lord, I have known this man a long time, and will attest upon my oath before this honorable bench that he is. And the judge said, Hold, give him his oath. So they swear him. Then he said, Envy, My lord, this man, notwithstanding his plausible name, is one of the vilest men in our country. He neither regardeth prince nor people, law nor custom, but doth all that he can to possess all men with certain of his disloyal notions, which he in the general calls principles of faith and holiness. And in particular, I heard him once myself affirm that Christianity and the customs of our town of Vanity were diametrically opposite and could not be reconciled. By which saying, my lord, he doth at once not only condemn all our laudable doings, but us in the doing of them. Then did the judge say to him, Hast thou any more to say? My lord, I could say much more, only I would not be tedious to the court. Yet, if need be, when the other gentlemen have given in their evidence, rather than anything shall be wanting that they will dispatch him, I will enlarge my testimony against him. So he was bid to stand by. Then they called Superstition, and bid him look upon the prisoner. They also asked, What could he say for their lord against the king against him? Then they swear him, so he began. Superstition said, My lord, I have no great acquaintance with this man, nor do I desire to have further knowledge of him. However, this I know, that he is a very pestilent fellow, from some discourse that, the other day, I had with him in this town. For then, talking with him, I heard him say that our religion was naught, and such by which a man could by no means please God. Which sayings of his, my lord, your lordship very well knows what necessarily thence will follow, to wit, that we do still worship in vain, are yet in our sins, and finally shall be damned. And this is that which I have to say. Then was Pilgrim sworn, and bid say what he knew in behalf of their lord the king against the prisoner at the bar. Pilgrim said, My lord, and you gentlemen all, this fellow I have known of a long time, and have heard him speak things that ought not to be spoke. For he hath railed on our noble prince Beelzebub, and hath spoken contemptibly of his honorable friends, whose names are the Lord Old Man, the Lord Carnal Delight, the Lord Luxurious, the Lord Desire of Vainglory, my old Lord Lechery, Sir Having Greedy, with all the rest of our nobility. And he hath said, moreover, that if all men were of his mind, if possible, there is not one of these noblemen should have any longer a being in this town. Besides, he hath not been afraid to rail on you, my lord, who are now appointed to be his judge, calling you an ungodly villain, with many other such like vilifying terms with which he hath bespattered most of the gentry of our town. When this Pilgrim had told his tale, the judge directed his speech to the prisoner at the bar, saying, Thou runagate, heretic, and traitor, hast thou heard what these honest gentlemen have witnessed against thee? Faithful said, May I speak a few words in my own defense? The judge said, Sirrah, sirrah, thou deservest to live no longer, but to be slain immediately upon the place. Yet, that all men may see our gentleness towards thee, let us hear what thou, vile runagate, hast to say. Faithful said, I say then, in answer to what Mr. Envy has spoken, I never said aught but this, that what rule or laws or customs or people were flat against the word of God or diametrically opposite to Christianity. If I have said amiss in this, convince me of my error, and I am ready here before you to make my recantation. Second, to wit, Mr. Superstition and his charge against me, I said only this, that in the worship of God there is required a divine faith. But there can be no divine faith without a divine revelation of the will of God. Therefore, whatever is thrust into the worship of God that is not agreeable to divine revelation cannot be done but by human faith, which faith will not be profitable to eternal life. Third, as to what Mr. Pilgrim hath said, I say, avoiding terms as that I am said to rail and the like, that the prince of this town, with all the rabblement, his attendants, by this gentleman named, are more fit for a being in hell than in this town and country, and so the Lord have mercy upon me. Then the judge called to the jury, who all this while stood by to hear and observe. Gentlemen of the jury, you see this man about whom so great an uproar hath been made in this town. You have also heard what these worthy gentlemen have witnessed against him. Also you have heard his reply and confession. It lieth now in your breast to hang him or save his life. But yet I think meet to instruct you into our law. There was an act made in the days of Pharaoh the Great, servant to our prince, that lest those of a contrary religion should multiply and grow too strong for him, their males should be thrown into the river. There was also an act made in the days of Nebuchadnezzar the Great, another of his servants, that whoever would not fall down and worship his golden image should be thrown into a fiery furnace. There was also an act made in the days of Darius, that whoso for some time called upon any god but him should be cast into the lion's den. Now the substance of these laws this rebel has broken, not only in thought, which is not to be borne, but also in word and deed, which must therefore needs be intolerable. For that of Pharaoh, his law was made upon a supposition to prevent mischief, no crime being yet apparent, but here is a crime apparent. For the second and third, you see he disputeth against our religion, and for the treason he hath confessed, he deserveth to die the death. Then went the jury out, whose names were Mr. Blind Man, Mr. No Good, Mr. Malice, Mr. Lovelust, Mr. Live Loose, Mr. Heady, Mr. High Mind, Mr. Enmity, Mr. Liar, Mr. Cruelty, Mr. Hate Light, and Mr. Implacable, who every one gave in his private verdict against him among themselves, and afterwards unanimously concluded to bring him in guilty before the judge. And first among themselves, Mr. Blind Man, the foreman, said, I see clearly that this man is a heretic. Then said Mr. No Good, away with such a fellow from the earth. Aye, said Mr. Malice, for I hate the very looks of him. Then said Mr. Lovelust, I could never endure him. Nor I, said Mr. Live Loose, for he would always be condemning my way. Hang him, said Mr. Heady. A sorry scrub, said Mr. High Mind. My heart riseth against him, said Mr. Enmity. He is a rogue, said Mr. Liar. Hanging is too good for him, said Mr. Cruelty. Let us dispatch him out of the way, said Mr. Hate Light. Then said Mr. Implacable, might I have all the world given me, I could not be reconciled to him. Therefore let us forthwith bring him in guilty of death. And so they did. Therefore he was presently condemned to be had from the place where he was, to the place from whence he came, and there to be put to the most cruel death that could be invented. They therefore brought him out to do with him according to their law. And first they scourged him, then they buffeted him, then they lanced his flesh with knives. After that they stoned him with stones, then pricked him with their swords, and last of all, they burned him to ashes at the stake. Thus came Faithful to his end. Now I saw that there stood behind the multitude a chariot and a couple of horses, waiting for Faithful, who, so soon as his adversaries had dispatched him, was taken up into it, and straightway was carried up through the clouds with the sound of the trumpet, the nearest way to the celestial gate. Brave Faithful, bravely done in word and deed, judge, witness, and jury have instead of overcoming thee but shown their rage. When they are dead, thou'lt live from age to age. But as for Christian, he had some respite and was remanded back to prison. So he there remained for a space. But he that overrules all things, having the power of their age in his own hand, so wrought it about that Christian for that time escaped them and went his way. And as he went, he sang, saying, Well, Faithful, thou hast faithfully professed unto thy Lord, with whom thou shalt be blessed. When faithless ones with all their vain delights are crying out under their hellish plights, sing, Faithful, sing, and let thy name survive, for though they killed thee, thou art yet alive. Now I saw in my dream that Christian went not forth alone, for there was one whose name was Hopeful, being made so by the beholding of Christian and Faithful in their words and behavior, in their sufferings at the fair, who joined himself unto him, and entering into a brotherly covenant, told him that he would be his companion. Thus, one died to bear testimony to the truth, and another rises out of his ashes to be a companion with Christian in his pilgrimage. This Hopeful also told Christian that there were many more of the men in the fair that would take their time and follow after. So I saw that quickly after they were got out of the fair, they overtook one that was going before them, whose name was By Ends. So they said to him, What countryman, sir, and how far you go this way? He told them that he came from the town of Fair Speech, and he was going to the celestial city, but told them not his name. From Fair Speech, said Christian, is there any good that lives there? And By Ends said, Yes, I hope. Christian said, Pray, sir, what may I call you? I'm a stranger to you, and you to me, said By Ends. If you be going this way, I shall be glad of your company. If not, I must be content. This town of Fair Speech, said Christian, I have heard of, and as I remember, they say it is a wealthy place. Bai-in said, yes, I will assure you that it is, and I have very many rich kindred there. Christian said, pray, who are your kindred there, if a man may be so bold? Bai-in said, almost the whole town, and in particular, my Lord Turnabout, my Lord Timeserver, my Lord Fair Speech, from whose ancestors that town first took its name, also Mr. Smoothman, Mr. Facing Both Ways, Mr. Anything, and the parson of our parish, Mr. Two Tongues, was my mother's own brother by father's side. And to tell you the truth, I am become a gentleman of good quality, yet my great-grandfather was but a waterman, looking one way and rowing another, and I got most of my estate by the same occupation. Christian said, are you a married man? Bai-in said, yes, and my wife is a very virtuous woman, and the daughter of a virtuous woman. She was my lady Feining's daughter. Therefore she came of a very honorable family, and is arrived to such a pitch of breeding that she knows how to carry it to all, even to prince and peasant. It is true we somewhat differ in religion from those of the stricter sort, yet but in two small points. First, we never strive against wind and tide. Secondly, we are always most zealous when religion goes in his silver slippers. We love much to walk with him in the street if the sun shines and the people applaud him. Then Christian stepped a little aside to his fellow hopeful, saying, it runs in my mind that this is one Bai-in's of Fair Speech, and if it be he, we have as very a knave in our company as dwelleth in all these parts. Then said Hopeful, ask him. Methinks he should not be ashamed of his name. So Christian came up with him again and said, sir, you talk as if you know something more than all the world doth, and if I take not my mark amiss, I deem I have a half a guess of you. Is not your name Mr. Bai-in's of Fair Speech? This is not my name, but indeed it is a nickname that is given me by some that cannot abide me, and I must be content to bear it as a reproach, as other good men have borne theirs before me. But did you never give an occasion to men to call you by this name? Never, never. The worst that ever I did to give them an occasion to give me this name was that I had always the luck to jump into my judgment with the present way of the times, whatever it was, and my chance was to get thereby. But if things are thus cast upon me, let me count them a blessing, but not let the malicious load me therefore with reproach. Christian said, I thought indeed that you were the man that I heard of. And to tell you what I think, I fear this name belongs to you more properly than you are willing we should think it doth. Bai-in said, well, if you will thus imagine, I cannot help it. You shall find me a fair company keeper, if you will still admit me your associate. Christian said, if you will go with us, you must go against wind and tide, the which I perceive is against your opinion. You must also own religion in his rags as well as in his silver slippers, and stand by him too when bound in irons, as well as when he walketh the streets with applause. Bai-in said, you must not impose, nor lord it over my faith. Leave me to my liberty, and let me go with you. Christian said, not a step further, unless you will do in what I propound as we. Then said Bai-in, I shall never desert my old principles, since they are harmless and profitable. If I may not go with you, I must do as I did before you overtook me, even go by myself, until some overtake me that will be glad of my company. Now I saw in my dream that Christian and Hopeful forsook him and kept their distance before him. But one of them looking back saw 3 men following Mr. Bai-in's, and behold, as they came up with him, he made them a very low conga, and they also gave him a compliment. The men's names were Mr. Hold the World, Mr. Money Love, and Mr. Save All, men that Mr. Bai-in's had formerly been acquainted with. For in their minority they were schoolfellows, and were taught by one Mr. Grightman, a schoolmaster in Lovegain, which is a market town in the country of Coveting in the north. This schoolmaster taught them the art of getting, either by violence, cozenage, flattery, lying, or by putting on the guise of religion. And these 4 gentlemen had attained much of the art of their master, so that they could each of them have kept such a school by themselves. Well, When they had, as I said, thus saluted each other, Mr. Moneylove said to Mr. By-ends, "Who are they upon the road before us?" For Christian and Hopeful were yet within view. By-ends said, "They are a couple of far countrymen that after their mode are going on pilgrimage." Moneylove said, "Alas, why did they not stay, that we might have had their good company? For they and we, and you, sir, I hope, are all going on pilgrimage." By-ends said, "We are so indeed. But the men before us are so rigid, and love so much their own notions, and do also so lightly esteem the opinions of others, that let a man be never so godly, yet if he jumps not with them in all things, they thrust him quite out of their company." Sabal said, "That is bad, but we read of some that are righteous overmuch, and such men's rigidness prevails with them to judge and condemn all but themselves. But I pray what, and how many, were the things wherein you differed?" By-ends said, "Why, they, after their headstrong manner, conclude that it is duty to rush on in their journey all weathers. And I'm for waiting for wind and tide. They are for hazarding all for God at a clap. And I am for taking all advantages to secure my life and estate. They are for holding their notions, though all other men are against them. But I am for religion in what, and so far as the times and my safety will bear it. They are for religion when in rags and contempt, but I am for him when he walks in his golden slippers, in the sunshine, and with applause." Mr. Hold the World said, "Aye, and hold you there still, good Mr. By-ends. For my part, I can count him but a fool, that having the liberty to keep what he has, shall be so unwise as to lose it. Let us be wise as serpents. It is best to make hay when the sun shines. You see how the bee lieth still all winter, and bestirs her only when she can have profit with pleasure. God sends sometimes rain, and sometimes sunshine. If they be such fools to go through the first, yet let us be content to take fair weather along with us. For my part, I like the religion best that will stand with the security of God's good blessings unto us. For who can imagine that is ruled by his reason, since God has bestowed upon us the good things of this life, but that he would have us keep them for his sake? Abraham and Solomon grew rich in religion, and Job says that a good man shall lay up gold as dust. But he must not be such as the men before us, if they be as you have described them." Mr. Sabal said, "I think that we are all agreed in this matter, and therefore there need be no more words about it." Mr. Moneylove said, "No, there needs be no more words about this matter indeed. For he that believes neither Scripture nor reason, and you see we have both on our side, neither knows his own liberty nor seeks his own safety." Mr. By-ends said, "My brethren, we are, as you see, going all on pilgrimage. And for our better diversion from things that are bad, give me leave to propound unto you this question. Suppose a man, a minister, or a tradesman, should have an advantage lie before him to get the good blessings of this life, yet so as that he can by no means come by them except, in appearance at least, he becomes extraordinarily zealous in some points of religion that he meddled not with before. May he not use these means to attain his end, and yet be a right honest man?" Mr. Moneylove said, "I see the bottom of your question, and with these gentlemen's good leave, I will endeavor to shape you an answer. And first, to speak to your question as it concerns a minister himself. Suppose a minister, a worthy man, possessed but of a very small benefice, and has in his eye a greater, more fat, and plump by far. He has also now an opportunity of getting of it, yet so as by being more studious, by preaching more frequently and zealously, and because the temper of the people requires it, by altering of some of his principles. For my part, I see no reason but a man may do this, provided he has a call, aye, and more a great deal besides, and yet be an honest man. For why? Number one, his desire of a greater benefice is lawful. This cannot be contradicted, since it is set before him by providence. So then, he may get it, if he can, making no question for conscience's sake. Number two, besides, his desire after that benefice makes him more studious, a more zealous preacher, and so makes him a better man. Yea, makes him better improve his parts, which is according to the mind of God. 3. Now, As for his complying with the temper of the people, by dissenting to serve them some of his principles, this argueth, first, that he is of a self-denying temper, second, of a sweet and winning deportment, and third, more fit for the ministerial function. 4. I conclude then that a minister that changes a small for a great should not, for so doing, be judged as covetous, but rather, since he is improved in his parts and industry thereby, be counted as one that pursues his call and the opportunity put into his hands to do good. And now to the second part of the question, which concerns the tradesman you mentioned. Suppose such a one to have but a poor employee in the world, but by becoming religious he may mend his market, perhaps get a rich wife, or more and far better customers to his shop. For my part, I see no reason but that this may be lawfully done. For why, number one, to become religious is a virtue, by what means soever a man becomes so. 2, nor is it unlawful to get a rich wife, or more customers to my shop. And 3, besides the man that gets these by becoming religious, gets that which is good, of them that are good, by becoming good himself. So then, here is a good wife, and good customers, and good gain, and all these by becoming religious, which is good. Therefore, to become religious, to get all these, is a good and profitable design. This answer, thus made by this Mr. Moneylove to Mr. Buy-in's question, was highly applauded by them all. Wherefore they concluded upon the whole that it was most wholesome and advantageous. And because, as they thought, no man was able to contradict it, and because Christian and Hopeful were yet within call, they jointly agreed to assault them with the question as soon as they overtook them, and the rather because they had opposed Mr. Buy-in's before. So they called after them, and they stopped, and stood still till they came up to them. But they concluded as they went that not Mr. Buy-in's, but old Mr. Hold the World should propound the question to them, because as they supposed, their answer to him would be without the remainder of that heat that was kindled betwixt Mr. Buy-in's and them at their parting a little before. So they came up to each other, and after a short salutation, Mr. Hold the World propounded the question to Christian and his fellow, and bid them to answer if they could. Then said Christian, even a babe in religion may answer 10,000 such questions. For if it be unlawful to follow Christ for loaves, as it is in the 6th chapter of John, how much more abominable is it to make of him and religion a stalking horse to get and enjoy the world? Nor do we find any other than heathens, hypocrites, devils, and witches that are of this opinion. First, heathens. For when Hamor and Shechem had a mind to the daughter and cattle of Jacob, and saw that there was no way for them to come at them but by being circumcised, they say to their companions, if every male of us be circumcised as they are circumcised, shall not their cattle and their substance and every beast of theirs be ours? Their daughter and their cattle were that which they sought to obtain, and their religion the stalking horse they made use of to come at them. Read the whole story in Genesis chapter 34. Second, the hypocritical Pharisees were also of this religion. Long prayers were their pretense, but to get widows' houses was their intent, and greater damnation was from God their judgment. Third, Judas the devil was also of this religion. He was religious for the bag, that he might be possessed of what was therein. But he was lost, cast away, and the very son of perdition. Fourth, Simon the witch was of this religion too, for he would have had the Holy Ghost that he might have got money therewith, and his sentence from Peter's mouth was according. Fifth, neither will it out of my mind, but that man that takes up religion for the world will throw away religion for the world. For so surely as Judas resigned the world in becoming religious, so surely did he also sell religion and his master for the same. To answer the question, therefore, affirmatively, as I perceive you have done, and to accept of as authentic such answer, is both heathenish, hypocritical, and devilish, and your reward will be according to your works. Then they stood staring one upon another, but had not wherewith to answer Christian. Hopeful also approved of the soundness of Christian's answer. So there was a great silence among them. Mr. By-ends and his company also staggered and kept behind, that Christian and Hopeful might outgo them. Then said Christian to his fellow, if these men cannot stand before the sentence of men, what will they do with the sentence of God? And if they are mute when dealt with by vessels of clay, what will they do when they shall be rebuked by the flames of a devouring fire? Then Christian and Hopeful outwent them again, and went till they came to a delicate plain called Ease. And we'll pick up there next week. See you then.